And we are back. It's another episode of Syracuse Sports. Hello, friends. My name is Brent Axe. Great to have you here. And this is a really fun episode of this show, my friends. We got together with Eric Devendorf and one of our Syracuse Sports Insiders, Frankie Saraceno, and we drafted the all-time Syracuse basketball starting five plus one. We added a bench player to our list as well. We did it draft style. There weren't a lot of rules, and I think you're going to enjoy some of the twists and turns. Some players maybe that went a little earlier than you would think, some players that didn't get drafted at all, and everything in between. We're not going to waste a lot of time. We're going to get right to it. But first, we're going to tell you to become a Syracuse Sports Insider. This idea came from our Syracuse Sports Insiders. I said, hey, guys, I want to start doing some drafts. What are some ideas that you have? This was one of the more popular answers. So we said, hey, let's start with the one that got the most votes to vote for an all-time Syracuse basketball starting five. Your suggestions came in because as a Syracuse Sports Insider, you get direct text access to me. And to sign up, all you have to do is text the word orange to 315-847-3895. Now, the cool thing is you can try it free for 2 weeks, see what we're sending you, my opinions, any breaking news and tidbits of information I have. You get it first as a Syracuse Sports Insider, my opinions first, and you can ask me direct questions anytime. Plus, I'm telling you what I'm thinking with the podcast. What do you want to hear on the podcast? And this is a direct example of suggestions that came from you. Plus, as you're going to see and hear from Frankie, he's a Syracuse Sports Insider. I put it out to you guys to see who wanted to be the third voice on the show to go with myself and Eric Devendorf. And as you will see and hear, Frankie is one of our more passionate Syracuse Sports Insiders and somebody that I've interacted with for years on social media and other places. It all comes full circle. You see the benefits to being a Syracuse Sports Insider. We're going to have more drafts and more fun shows to come, and your feedback, of course, is always a part of that. So become a Syracuse Sports Insider today. The info is right there on your screen if you're watching on YouTube. But if you're not, text the word orange to 315-847-3895. Just $3.99 a month, less than $1 a week. It's free to try for 2 weeks. Rock and roll. And let's do it. Let's get a little drafty in here, shall we? This was a lot of fun. I think you guys are going to enjoy it too. The all-time Syracuse basketball starting five plus one. Let the draft commence. We have brought together Eric Devendorf, yours truly, the host of Syracuse Sports, and let us introduce, ladies and gentlemen, Syracuse Sports Insider, one of the more passionate Syracuse fans that I know. He has shown up in my timeline countless times, always enjoy it when he does, and he is here with us today to offer the fan perspective and the Syracuse Sports Insider perspective on the draft. Frankie Saraceno. Frankie, how you doing, buddy?
Gentlemen, good to see you. I'm so glad to be here. This is a thrill for me. It really is. It really, really is.
So, Frankie, tell the people out there a little about you and how you became a Syracuse fan and how's life going these days.
Well, great. Thank you. I mean, I'm from Rochester, New York originally. My dad was a huge sports fan, so obviously of that generation, I got hooked into sports quite quickly. As far as SU sports goes, I mean, I remember watching college basketball guys in the 78-79 season vividly. Of course, Syracuse, that was the Louis and Bowie days. They were nationally rated. I mean, Jim Boeheim was just building the program at that time. But for whatever reason, I mean, I just became hooked on college basketball. The tournament, which, of course, then was only 40 teams in 1979. It was not what it is now. But we moved to Syracuse in January of 1980. I went to my first SU basketball game. It had to be the 80-81 season. It was a game against St. John's. St. John's won 80-76, as I recall. It was a game on NBC. But I was hooked. I mean, I went to SU football games after that. I went Gary Anderson was the kicker. That's how far back I go.
This is what's great. We've got somebody who vividly remembers watching Syracuse basketball in the late 1970s. I was born in the late 1970s.
Right.
Devo, you came along a little later, but we've got
87.
media. Frankie works for ESPN, so kind of a media, but certainly a hardcore fan perspective and the player perspective on this. So as I told Frankie and Devo, guys, I intentionally did not make a lot of rules for this. Basically, here's how this is going to go. Frankie's going to pick first. Devo's going to pick second. I'm going to pick third, and that'll be the order throughout the draft. And what we're going to do is we're going to select our all-time Syracuse basketball starting five, plus a bench guy. So we're each picking 6 players. This does not have to be a traditional basketball team. It doesn't have to be 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center. You could take 5 guards if you want. But we're going to take our guys, and once they're off the board, they're off the board, and we're going to see how the teams wind up here. And this is all time Syracuse basketball. Every player that's ever put on a uniform is eligible here. We have a current player in the group. I wonder if he'll get selected amongst the contestants here. We shall see. And without further ado, let's get into it, ladies and gentlemen, with the first pick in the all-time Syracuse basketball starting five. Frankie, you lead us off, then I'll go Devo, and then it'll go yours truly.
All right. Preparing for the number 1 pick, I rankled with this. I thought, should I go with Jim Boeheim thought was the greatest ever? Should I go like my wheelhouse 80s? I landed on Carmelo Anthony. So
it's not a bad pick.
Hard for me to, yeah, no, I know. Pretty, a couple of good guys to choose from. I landed with Melo as my number 1.
It's amazing when you look at all the players in the history of the program. The one and dones didn't come until, later on, right? But he's the ultimate one and done. He's the ultimate guy that delivered that championship, the skill set, everything. One of the highest NBA draft picks in Syracuse basketball history. You can't go wrong with Melo.
Like I think after they won the title, I think Boeheim said he was the best player in the country, and he was at that point. But like, boy, oh boy, like it was electricity. Probably I hadn't seen since the Pearl, to be honest.
So that year, 03, because at that time, I was committed to Michigan State.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, in 03, I was committed to Michigan State. I committed my sophomore year of high school to Michigan State. So that year, the national championship, when they went and played at Michigan State, I don't know if you remember that game, Brent, when they played at Michigan State.
Oh, yeah. I do remember that game.
I think they ended up losing?
No, they beat Michigan State.
They did. Yeah. You're right, they did. Despite Chris Hill had like 10 threes in the game. I remember he hit like 8 at the top of the key because they were splitting that different. It's hard in the zone, like when they keep that guy and then they have the 2 wings. So he hit like 10 threes. But I remember watching the game. I was there, and I remember watching Melo and GMAC and Billy Edlin, Hack, and all those guys. And that moment right there, I turned to my coach and I was like, I think I need to change my mind. I changed my mind. I want to see what's going on with Syracuse. He made the call to Syracuse the next couple of days. Next week, Coach Boeheim and Troy Weaver was the assistant at the time. Yeah. They came down to Detroit. It was at Detroit Denby High School where we had our AAU practice. And the gym was filled. It was like Texas, Arizona, UConn, Syracuse, because it was all Division I players on my team. But I remember after practice, I had a pretty good practice. Coach Boeheim, Coach Weaver came up to me, and Coach was like, hey, what do you want to do? You want to come?
So I think a lot of people figured Melo would be off the board pretty quickly. He's the top pick. So now we go to Devo, who's got the second pick here and his first of 6. Who are you going with, Devo?
Yeah, so just how my mind works, I have to go by position because I'm thinking like from a coach's perspective that we're going to play with these guys. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to do 5 guards. I'm going to do my team how I would want to play. So my first pick is going to be Derek Coleman. I'm going to have him at the 5, and then I got the rest of the 4 guys in my mind, or the 5 guys in my mind. But I mean, DC, I think he was a guy who could have played in any era. Like he could have played. Obviously, he stood out in that era. He could have stood out in this era as well. Just how he was able to move and his versatility. His strength obviously was rebounding the basketball, but he was a guy that he would have excelled in any era. And obviously him being the number 1 pick, going to New Jersey, it was a no-brainer for me. It was going to be Melo, but if it wasn't Melo, it was going to be DC. So DC, he'd be my starting 5.
The number 1 overall pick in the 1991 NBA draft to the New Jersey Nets. And you can see him right over my shoulder here in my Syracuse basketball trading card set. There's DC right up there. All right, so Melo and Coleman off the board. My first pick, I kind of debated between 2 names that I felt would be here. I would either go with a historical context and an NBA Hall of Famer, or somebody that changed college basketball and Syracuse basketball as we know it. Frankie, you brought up his name earlier. He's my all-time favorite guy. I can't not pick Pearl Washington here. Pearl Washington leading the charge, electric guard, a player that we had just and timed out with the rise of the Big East and Jim Boeheim doubting that they could put 30,000 people in a football stadium to watch basketball. And here comes this kid from New York City who still did things on the court in the mid-1980s. I have not seen replicated. Maybe that's just my nostalgia kicking in and, things were better back in my day kind of thing. But
Right.
Pearl Washington, man, got to go with the Pearl here with the third pick.
I don't think any athlete made me smile more than Pearl Washington.
It's a great way to put it.
Just sheer joy, and it's just, and one thing, DC was going to be my number one, Devo. I was debating he or Melo, and Derek made a play in his freshman year. I don't know if you've seen it in the highlights where he went up against St. John's and literally blocked the ball, pulled it down, and threw an outlet. I think it was to Stephen Thompson for a dunk. And this is in the day where Dome was on fire. I mean, and that's where my heart is. And Brent, I will say I'm kind of thinking the way Devo is in building my team. I'm kind of looking at it as like, who are my guys I'm going to send out there? I think with that in mind, I'm going to put a center right next to Melo, and I'm going to go maybe surprising, but it shouldn't surprise. I'm going to go with Ronnie Cycli.
Okay.
Oh, that's a good one.
I'm going to go with Ronnie Cycli. Just because he was the most outstanding player of the East Regional in 1987. And, his senior year, unfortunately, was a little up and down. But that year, when he just finally put it all together that year, I mean, he was such a force with that team, and he came into his own. He was blocking shots. He was confident. I mean, he was a preseason All-American the next year. People forget that when Syracuse came in ranked number one. I just think, and he improved every year. This is back in the day where they really, developed these big guys year in and year out. So I'm going to put – I'd be curious to see what the fans think about that. Yeah, I'm going to put Ronnie.
He went a lot higher than I thought he would. And that's no disrespect to Ronnie Cycli, Devo, but be the fourth overall pick shows you the respect that you had for him as a player, Frankie. And he is start to finish one of the most improved players in the history of Syracuse basketball.
He couldn't dunk. My friends and I used to joke. We'd come into school and say, "Oh, did you see Cycli actually dunk the basketball? Like he actually finished the dunk. Like he was just so strong that." And I remember Brent Musburger said during a game, he said, "That's the greatest listener in college basketball," just because you just see images of Boeheim like in his face during games. So, and it's maybe that's
it's your team, man. I love it. I love that we got a curveball already.
Yeah,
we'll see. We'll see what you think.
All right, Devo, to you. This is the fifth overall pick. Your second pick.
Yeah, so I could have went with the point guard first. I probably should have. That's the quarterback, right? But it's just so many great guards in Syracuse history. So I know I got a lot of options there. So I wanted to, have a good front line start with DC, being probably one of the best college basketball players of all time. I mean, in Derek Coleman. Sure. But now I'm going to go with the point guard, a guy who I think in my mind is one of the greatest point guards in Syracuse basketball history. If he didn't get injured, he'd still be in the NBA right now. I was able to play with him for 2 years.
I think I know where you're going now.
the most athletic, one of the most athletic guards I played for, one of the guards who had the most charisma. I mean, he had it all. He had the smile. He had the shot. He could pass it. He could do everything. Johnny Flynn. I'm going to take Johnny Flynn at the one.
Wow.
And you got to think about it. He was the top four. He was the fourth pick in the draft, or sixth, one of them.
He was the sixth pick in the draft right before Steph Curry, famously. Yeah.
So look, this is a guy who I played against a lot of guys, right? A lot of guys at Syracuse outside in the summertime with a bunch of different pros. Play with KD, Ty Lawson. This guy, Johnny Flynn, the way that he competed, on top of the skill that he had, on top of the knowledge of the game that he had, no doubt in my mind, one of the greatest basketball players. Forget like position. I think he was just one of the greatest competitors to come through Syracuse basketball. And I think at 5'10" with a 46-inch vertical, being being that size and be able to get drafted 6th in the NBA draft. And again, if he didn't get hurt, let's not forget his first year, he averaged 13, 14 points a game, all rookie team, playing in Minnesota, playing in the triangle offense, which is a hard offense to get used to with Kurt Rambis. And I remember one game, he was going against Darren Williams. Darren Williams in his prime with the Utah Jazz gave him 29 and 6. So that's nothing to sneeze at right there. But I just think for me, I saw him live in person every single day. I saw how he worked. Johnny Flynn at the one.
That's what I like about this, though. You play with him, he was a killer, the athleticism.
Killer, capital K.
And he's a leader. Like, just not only the charisma, but just the way he led that team. And I forget the guy for Rutgers off the top of my head, but was it Mike Rosario? I think that.
Dunked on him so hard.
That
was unbelievable.
Rejected the screen, baseline.
He ruined his life in that moment.
He had to transfer. He transferred to Florida.
He did.
Still some players on the board I didn't think would be here. In my second pick, the 6th overall. I'm still going to go with what I was originally going to, and I'm sticking with the backcourt here. I'm just putting together an all-time backcourt. I know this is like fantasy land here, but theoretically in fantasy land, you need great guard play to win. So I'm going to round out my backcourt. Jerry McNamara, sniper, all-time 3-point shooter. You need the 3-point shooting in any, any legacy of the game, any time of the game. But I'll take a guy that is the all-time leading 3-point shooter in Syracuse history. And it's a lot like what you said about Johnny Devo, the grit, the determination, the leadership, willing Syracuse through that 2006 Big East tournament, let alone being a freshman and knocking down 6 threes in the first half of the championship game, countless buzzer beaters, and just everything that Jerry brought to the table, which he later did as a coach. And now we're going to see it as a head coach out at Siena. G-Mac. So I got my backcourt set, and we'll have to start rounding out the big guys here as we go forward. But see what Frankie's got for his 3rd pick, and we're now at the 7th overall pick of the draft.
See, now I'm torn. Like I feel like I should I should put a guard in here, but there's one guy that's sitting there as a forward who I think could complement my front court, and I'm going to go with him, and that's Billy Owens.
Oh,
that's a tough one. That's
the first one I really thought I could sneak it and get, but you snagged him. Good one.
I just remember the immense. My friends and I literally we were at Grimes the day that he announced. One of us, we had a plan. One of us had a transistor radio. Google that, kids. Literally, we had a plan. Like, all right, what time do we think it's going to happen? Oh, is it are you in study hall? Are you in? It literally, I forgot which one did it. They snuck out.
That's great.
And heard the radio. It must have been Doug Logan or something like that, like reporting for WSYR.
Doug Logan, yeah.
And I remember him coming back because it was him in Morning that year. In Morning, I think had already committed to Georgetown, so he kind of came back in and he was just like. And we were like, oh, we're going crazy. It was unbelievable. I can't even, I wish I could describe it. Like getting him, especially after the 87 season when Michael Owens was the hero for the 11-0 team, the 2-point conversion against West Virginia, like to have these two guys on campus, his skill set. And there's another guy. He kicked around the NBA. Devo, you know this, Axe, you know this. Like he kicked around the NBA. He's a guy that everyone loved. He just, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was injuries or what. I'd have to go back and look. He just never, lottery pick. I thought he was going to have a.
Certainly injuries were a factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I really did. I mean, when he was it's just unbelievable.
It's amazing to hear you say that, Frankie, because we're so used to now, you watch the thing on the stream and the kid puts the 3 hats on the table. Like that's just routine now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not to date you, buddy, but we're talking about the late 1980s here. Players making that announcement. This was not a regular thing. That tells you how big of a deal Billy Owens was, top overall recruit, and just what that meant for Syracuse. It was Mello later and some other big recruits that have come along since. But at that time, to keep the legacy going was just amazing. And look, he was a part of those. He left a year early, which typically didn't happen at that time. And unfortunately, look, he was an amazing player. I was there, the free throws against Georgetown and everything, but he'll always be associated with the number 2 seed that lost to Richmond, right? That's a legacy stop short.
The only thing that gives me comfort nowadays, there was 2 things that gave me comfort of that. Number one, 2 years later, Arizona got beat by Santa Clara and a guard named Steve Nash. And now the tournament, what it's become, I mean, being the first sucks, but Virginia was the first team to lose a 1 seed. And I think more people think about that more. As Syracuse fans, you kind of have to hold on to certain things.
You're right.
Yeah. That's just – and then I saw the matchup. I'm like, Richmond at Cole Fieldhouse in Maryland. And then I just remember Lenny Elmore at the end of the game, and he was right, crushing Syracuse, how unprepared they were, how unfocused they were. There was a lot of stuff going on, I know, at that time with the first investigation. There was a lot of stuff going on. And I just remember I was devastated isn't even the word to describe how I felt. It was like a kick right in the stomach. I just sat there and didn't say a word for 10 minutes after the game.
Yeah, let's not forget that.
I mean,
there was a national championship loss just a few years before that. Some guy hit a shot, I think I heard, for Indiana.
Right.
And tough Elite 8 loss to Illinois. And there was, they were kind of all over the map.
Kendall Gill.
Time. There's
unbelievable.
There's a name right there.
Now
all right, Devo, we're back to you. This is your 3rd pick. It is the 8th overall pick of this draft. Wow. So far, Devo has picked Derek Coleman and Johnny Flynn. Who does he add to the list?
And I tell you what, I see my team developing in my head very well. So I appreciate you guys. I'm going to go back in the front court. This is a guy who could play 3-4. He could shoot the ball outside. He could post up mid post. He could rebound. He played 9 years in the league. Same thing as Billy Owens. He was well traveled in the league. Probably didn't have a career that people thought he would coming out of college in the NBA. But nonetheless, I thought he had a pretty good NBA career. And that's going to be John Wallace.
Oh, Tebow, darn it.
John Wallace. I mean, again, top 3, top 5 all time in scoring. Back then, you didn't see a lot of guys at that size step out, shoot the 3, be able to put it on the ground, get in the mid post. He could play at all 3 levels.
Axe, is that where you were going?
That was my next pick.
Yeah.
Darn you.
Yeah, John Wallace. So, I mean, DC at the 5, John Wallace at the 4, Jay Flynn at the 1. Whew. I could win a lot of games 3-on-5 with that.
I'll tell you a quick story about Wallace. My senior year, so his senior year in high school at Greece Athena was my senior year at Fisher, believe it or not. So I was interning at Channel 10 in Rochester for Rich Funky. John Kutchko, sorry, Channel 8. So he was such a big story. They'd send me out a lot to the Greece Athena games, and we'd cover the games. And as soon as they got the ball, usually Wallace was the first person to score, and the fans would start chanting. They'd chant his name, Wallace. And as soon as he'd score, they'd go, "It's all over." and this was when he was obviously being recruited heavily. And that's a big reason why we covered it. But that's a sneaky. I thought about him, but that's a good one. Though.
That's a great pick.
All-timer right there. All-timer.
You threw me off, Devo, because that was my guy. And my strategy of going with 2 guards here. Now, there's a lot of great players left. Don't get me wrong here, but I've really got to make an impact here. And I'm debating between 2 names because I've got to go with a forward here or a big. Do I go old school or do I go newer school? And a guy that if I had asked you who is the 5th all-time leading scorer in the history of Syracuse basketball, I don't think this name would pop in your head, but it is Hakeem Warwick. Hakeem Warwick is the 5th all-time leading scorer in Syracuse history. We all remember the block in the 2003 national championship game, the consistency, the defense, the way he could attack the rim. We talked about Johnny's dunk earlier. How many people did Hakeem embarrass with that Gumby-like reach that he had?
Oh, yeah.
So I'm debating between him, and I don't want to say the other name in case it tips you guys off.
I wrote him in. I wrote in Hack already. You're still noodling on it.
I'm going to go with it. I'm going to Hakeem Warwick. Let's go.
You are? Okay.
I'm going to Hakeem Warwick. I'm going to hope the other guy I'm thinking of is still around when I come back.
He won't be. I'm going to take him. I'm going to take him. He won't be. I know what you're thinking about.
Don't do it, Debo. Don't do it.
I'm not going to take him.
I think I gave it away when I said old school, but
yeah, he's not.
I'm going to hope he's still there. when we
think
come
Dino
around.
and I are on to you here, but I'm not going that way. Hack's a great pick, by the way. Axe. I mean,
Yeah.
Again, you talk about one of those singular moments. The team hanging on for dear life, and here he comes. I hazard to shudder to think, I should say, if that thing would have gone to a damn replay in this day and age, like if they can you imagine? You just imagine
as clean as could be, though. That's the thing. He came from literally out of the frame and blocked that shot. And
that's a great pick, Axe. And that's you are lining up. It's interesting. You're lining up there with two guys that were on the same team.
Yeah, I didn't mean for that to happen. It's just kind of how the board fell, but that'll help. I got a little chemistry going.
I'm actually going to continue that. I'm actually going to continue that trend here.
Okay.
My team needs a general. I need one of the best. I need Sherman Douglas.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
I need someone to lead the break. Of course, I'm picking a team that played in a different era, the mini Lakers. But Sherman Douglas, I remember when Pearl announced that he was leaving, the whole city was just Father Charles Borgognoni, who was Our Lady of Pompeii at that time, who was the team chaplain. My mother went to this. She used to go to these church functions all the time. Father Charles came out of this church function she was at, and he announced it to the crowd. He said, I'm here to tell you that Pearl Washington has just – and it was just this, and I remember all of us were like, my buddies, they're like, what are we going to do? Well, we got Sherman Douglas. I guess, boy, that turned out pretty good, huh?
I mean, it really did. Think of the pressure that was on that kid. And, with Sherman, the hike pass against Indiana the year after the national championship game. But I got to say, my favorite Sherm memory, because think of Sherman, you think of he was the all-time leading assist guy in NCAA history when he left and the general. But his last game in the Dome against Georgetown, he goes up the court and throws a reverse jam down that just came out of nowhere because he just never did that. Yeah. But it was the ultimate walk-off play right there. Great pick there, Frankie. All right, Devo, we're back to you. You've picked a hell of a team so far. Derek Coleman, Johnny Flynn, John Wallace, who gets added to that squad.
I'm liking what you're doing so far here, Devo. I'm curious. I think I know where you're going now.
Yeah, so now I'm just gonna go a purebred scorer, a guy who could just get buckets. I think at the 2-guard position, that's what you're looking for. I was going back and forth like, hey, should I just get a straight shooter? I got all these athletes around him. Now, can I get a guy who spreads the floor? But this guy right here, he could shoot the ball. He could, again, all 3 levels. The guy is the all-time leading scorer in Syracuse basketball history. He's a guy who he made it to the NBA. Same type of deal. These guys that we're talking about have great college careers, and then you get to the NBA, it's just situation, it's fit. A lot of things have to go right to have that successful career at the next level. But my pick is going to be Lawrence Moten. Lawrence Moten at the 2. I mean, not only is he a great player, but he's a great friend of mine. He's a guy that when I was playing at Syracuse, he came back to finish up his degree. And me and him really developed a really good relationship that is still to this day. So you can't go wrong with that pick. I mean,
no, you can't. You can't. He was the all-time leading scorer in the history of the Big East up until a couple of years ago.
Exactly.
And the reason that when I played lacrosse, I jacked up my socks to my knees every game as a tribute to
you brought
Lawrence
that
Moten.
back. You really brought that back. I remember, like, we all laughed at that. And we were like, he looks pretty. He looked cool. He was so smooth, too, just so silky smooth. And he was the guy I was hoping to pick next, Devo. So you bagged me that time. So with that, not who I was thinking you were going with, though. Now, Axe, I mean, again, I'm thinking your front court. You're thinking centers. And one guy out there, I thought you're going to take.
He's still there.
Okay.
I tipped him off, and most of the guys we've picked have been somewhat, I would say, quote unquote, modern era, right? But I'm kicking it back to the 70s. I'm kicking it back to the player. There was 2 players that Jim Boeheim, as soon as he took over, said, we've got to get these guys. And one of them was Roosevelt Bowie, right? Can't go wrong with somebody who dominated the front court, helped lift Syracuse up in the Boeheim era. And we've talked about a lot of guys that have had NBA careers. Roosevelt Bowie knew international basketball, professional basketball, as well as anybody. And no matter how you spelled his last name, retired his jersey, the Louie and Bowie show together. I wish I could pick them together. Maybe I could still pick Louis Orr on the next go around here if you guys don't take him. One of the great combos in Syracuse history. I can only take one, but I want to mix it up here a little bit. Somebody just owned the paint in a day when things were a little rougher in the paint in college basketball. Let's go, Roosevelt Bowie.
You know, he was the leader of that team in 1980. That was the 1 seed in the East, and that lost to Lute Olson's Iowa team in Philadelphia in the Sweet 16. And the only reason they lost that game, one of the reasons, I mean, Iowa was a good team as a 5 seed, I believe, but Rosie got in foul trouble, and they had a lot of, remember, different game back then. You could stall the ball a lot. Syracuse pressed a lot back then, but Bowie got into some foul trouble, and that was a big reason why they lost 88-77. But he was a fun player to watch. That's a great pick. All right,
Frankie, back to you. And just a reminder so far, Carmelo Anthony, Ronnie Cycli, Billy Owens, Sherman Douglas. You're now rounding out your starting 5 with a bench guy to go. You can take your bench guy now, by the way. It doesn't have to be the last pick.
That's true. I'm going to round up my top, my starting 5, and I got to go. I'm going old school here, too. I got to go with the greatest to ever do it at Syracuse, and that's Mr. David Bing.
Yeah.
Kind of shame on us that Bing made it this far.
I was thinking the same thing. At
least he got picked.
I was going to say it would be a bad job out of all of us if he didn't get picked, but I guess it's just the way I built my team.
Yeah, sometimes it's how the board falls, but I mean, come on. The ultimate gentleman, the mayor of Detroit, entrepreneur, but Hall of Famer.
Devo, you know him. You got to know. You got to know.
Oh yeah, I know Dave. I know Dave pretty well, man. One of the nicest guys ever. I've been out to eat with him a few times, and we've hung out and just talked about life stuff. And besides basketball, one of the smartest dudes. Obviously, to be a mayor in a major city, you have to be. And then all the stuff he's done on the business side, and not to mention top 50 greatest all time. Like that, he's in the top 50 greatest all time player of all time in the NBA. So
teams, I think
I think his first year he averaged like 28 with the Pistons or something like that. Right. He was
with no 3-point line. Obviously.
Exactly. Yeah. He was a bad man. He probably shouldn't have went this late, but again, how I'm thinking in my mind, I'm putting a team together that it may not be the best player, but my team is gonna be the best team.
And to that, we add the 5th player on your team, Devo, which so far is Derek Coleman, Johnny Flynn, John Wallace, Lawrence Moten. And now we add who?
All right. So for my 3-man, so I was looking at, I want a guy who could be like a Swiss Army knife, right? He's not necessarily going to be one of the best players overall in Syracuse basketball history. I want a guy who could, guard, who could shoot, he could do a lot of different things, because the team that I have, there's a lot of guys who can score the basketball, right? So we need guys who are willing to do the other things. So it's 2 guys that came to mind. One is a new school guy, fairly recent, and then the other one is an old school guy. And I'm going back and forth in my head because one of them is like he's a Magic Johnson type. He could do it all. He could pass it. He could run the point guard from the three position. He could bring it up. He could rebound. The only thing that was kind of holding me back from it was the defensive side of the ball. But if we're playing zone, maybe you can hide it a little bit.
That's a great sell job. I'm intrigued here.
But I think I'm going to go with in a different direction. So this guy, he was an All-American. He was the Big East Player of the Year, I believe, his senior year. He could shoot the corner 3, shoot the wing. One of the most athletic guys to ever play at Syracuse. And when he got to the NBA, his main job was to guard the best player. So I think that he'll be able to do that on this team, and also he just adds athleticism and versatility. I'm gonna go with Wesley Johnson.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, Wes Johnson at the 3. I just think he complements all those other guys. He's a guy who's very selfless. He can shoot the ball. If I'm coaching the team, you guarding the best player, Wes, and he's going to be a guy that could change the game just off of alley-oop dunk. You know how the momentum shifts right away when he comes down the lane and just dunks on somebody as like a 50.
Oh, I didn't see that. I was trying to think. I was thinking in my head, who's he talking about?
It was either him or Leo Routins. I was gonna go with Leo because I just
Leo's
feel like
on my list. Leo's the ultimate. There's a couple guys, and I think the three of us know who are all thinking of the same guys on the list. But Wes on that 20, when Brent, you remember, and Diva, you probably do, when Mike Waters wrote those great series of columns where he ranked the top teams he covered in his era of covering. Mike Waters, I'm talking about, with he ranked all the teams he's covered. Mm-hmm. That 2010 team, he and I have actually talked about this on X, like privately. If AO doesn't get hurt, that to me, you talk about what ifs, you talk about luck, especially living in this state in Connecticut. It's just that team. That was a perfect team.
They were set up.
That was a perfect team. And I still go back to under 3 with the ball, and it played their worst game against Butler. And if AO plays that game and gives them, what, Devo, 15 and 10? I mean, they neutralized Matt Howard completely. It just makes you sick. Like when I think of that team, and Wes on that team was lights out up in Buffalo. He was so good those first 2 games against Vermont and Gonzaga, right? I mean, he was so smooth.
All right, guys.
Hell of a player.
He was, and great memories there. Frankie's bringing all the great memories here. Father Guido Sarducci, I think you talked about earlier. All right, so I was looking at it here, and I've compiled some scorers. I have the 4th all-time leading scorer in Jerry McNamara. I have the 5th all-time leading scorer in Hakeem Warwick. I have one of the most explosive players in the history of the game and a trendsetter and just the ultimate guard in Pearl Washington. I have a consummate center in Roosevelt Bowie. So what does my team need, right? How about the 7th all-time leading scorer in Syracuse history? Explosive, even though he was 6'2", explosive player to the rim, aggressive rebounder. People might be very surprised that I'm taking him because, unfortunately, he was a terrible free throw shooter, and as we all know, free throws matter. Stevie Thompson. Give me Stevie Thompson in that front court with Hakeem Warwick and Roosevelt Bowie, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And there's just some names that we've mentioned, a bunch of them in this draft that just roll off the tongue, and those guys in the 80s. And look, Stevie's got to be on that list, and I don't think he gets enough credit for the kind of player he was. We're giving him credit here. He's in my starting 5, and he is the pick here. So let's remind before one last pick from each of us.
Love that pick.
Which I think we all saved our bench guy for our last pick. You didn't have to. You could take the bench guy and stash him if you wanted him.
Yeah, I saved him, yeah.
So Frankie, Carmelo Anthony, Ronnie Cycli, Billy Owens, Sherm Douglas, Dave Bing. Devo, Derek Coleman, Johnny Flynn, John Wallace, Lawrence Moten, Wes Johnson. I have picked Pearl Washington, Jerry McNamara, Hakeem Warwick, Roosevelt Bowie, Stevie Thompson. Now we're going on the bench. Maybe that changes your strategy of what kind of player you want. But let's see what we got. Frankie, let's start with you.
Oh, man. I got my shooter. I wanted David Bing because I needed my shooter. If Melo could shoot, he could certainly hit the 3. I'm trying to think about, can we play in any era? I think we can. I'm going to go with a guy who, God, I wish we'd have seen more of him. But he was the perfect guy off the bench, the perfect Vinnie Johnson for this team, and that's Dion Waiters.
Oh, that was mine.
That was yours?
Yeah, I was going to take Dion. That's my
fun fact, never started a game at Syracuse.
Never started a game. Now, I'm flooding you guys with memories here, but I was at the regional final in Boston that year. And, everyone, it's funny. I like to needle my UConn friends, like how they take over every arena. Let me tell you something. There may have been 1,000 Ohio State fans in that building that night. And it's just the bounce of the ball. I'm determined if Jim had put him in more in that game, I think.
Frankie, say it, man. That was the worst officiated game.
It was one of the worst officiated games I've ever seen. And I'm glad you let
I don't say this often, as much as I critique officials. They lost that game because of the officials. The officiating was terrible in that game.
I didn't want to be the one to say that, and I'll tell you a funny
story.
Say it. Oh, thank you. So, Devo, my buddy Jeff and I, one of my college roommates, we're literally in the last row. And it was one of the umpteenth calls that we were losing our minds over. And the guy I forget the guy who ran the committee that year was at that game and was by the Syracuse bench. And Boeheim, I don't think the TV cameras caught this. Boeheim was in psycho mode. He turns around. I look at my buddy Jeff. I'm like, look at Boeheim. Like, he's pissed. He's like, who is it? I'm like, that's the guy who's the committee chair. I'm like, we were losing our minds. Like, every call, it was I think it was 29 all at halftime. It just felt like they couldn't get a call. You know, the whole Fab Melo stuff was going on at that time. And that's another thing. If Melo you look back, again, what if? You look at what's going on with teams now where they basically thumb their nose to the NCAA and they played their guys anyway. I wonder sometimes if Syracuse just played Fab Melo. He would have neutralized Sullinger. It would have been a totally different game. But you're right. The officiating in that game, and I don't like to blame officials either, Brent, it was being in person, we were losing our minds. It was awful. But Dion that year, we had a pro body. Devo, you know this. Like, guy was just, man, was he talented. You know, and he had a decent career in the NBA. Again, he just was one of those guys that
he had a $60 million contract. He could have got
did
more,
quite well.
You know,
won a title. Now, he never played in the 2020 NBA Finals, but he's got a ring. He has a category on my favorite podcast, by the way, the Dion Waiters Heat Check on the Rewatchables podcast.
Yeah.
So
all right, Devo. He swept your guy. He took your bench guy. You got a lot of good choices here. So with Dion off the board, who's your sixth man?
So for me, when I look for a guy coming off the bench, I'm looking for a guy who's going to give a spark, who's going to come in and give a scoring punch. And I'm going old school with this. This is a guy who I think not a lot of people talk about him a lot, but he should be talked about more because he had one of the better careers in Syracuse history. And he got drafted and played, I think, second round in the NBA, and then he ended up playing in Italy for a while and having a really good career. Bigger guard, you know, he was a guy who, again, was ahead of his time. I think he's about 6'7", could shoot the ball, super versatile. Ralph Addison.
I knew Devo as soon as you started talking bigger guard, shooter, and a lot of people will tell you that 86 team that lost to Navy when Pearl just took over, he got hurt early in January, I want to say. He got hurt. And remember, this is the year before the three-point line. He was deadly from that mid-range jumper. When he came back in the Big East tournament, they just never got going. But, man, was he clutch. That's a great pick.
That's a great pick, consistent, top 10 scorer in Syracuse history, if I'm not mistaken. If not, he's right there.
Yeah.
He's number 10, Axe.
And, by the way, that 1986 Navy team, they had some dude named David Robinson.
Yeah, he was all right.
He was okay. I heard he was all right. And I remember randomly going to a Phoenix Suns game because my grandparents used to live in Phoenix, and Raphael Addison was playing for Phoenix. Yeah. And we were watching warm-ups, and my sister just very loudly said, "Raph, we're from Syracuse!" And he came over and he said hello, and he fist pounded and gave us an autograph, and
he's
it was
a good
great.
dude. He's a good
cool
dude. Great dude. Great guy.
All right, well, you made it too easy on me. I was thinking this guy would go here in this spot. There's actually two names. So now that I've got the last pick, and you can't swipe anybody from me, there's three names here that really pop. One is CJ Fair, one is Josh Pace, and the other, to go a little old school on you, is Wendell Alexis. I mean, Wendell Alexis was the ultimate bench guy for a while before he worked his way in here. I am definitely going Josh Pace here. You said it earlier, Devo, the guy that just would come off the bench, give you energy, change, no pun intended, change of pace. He was underestimated his whole career. He had just that way to get in the lane and find a way to make it happen. The floater shot, just a key component of that championship team. And just when you talk to people through the years, I've had so many people say to me, once you get past the stars, and that's what's cool about doing a draft like this, but how many people are just like, man, I loved watching Josh Pace play basketball. Perfect bench guy. He's my sixth man.
That's a great pick. I mean, Devo, I think we're all in the same ballpark. Dion, Josh was on my list. CJ Fair was definitely a guy I was thinking of. I'll throw another name at you I thought of, Andy Routens.
Yeah, I was thinking about taking Andy just for a shooter. I mean, but he's one of the smartest players too that I ever played with. He's more than a shooter.
I mean, Vic Hansen, one of the greatest players who ever played in the history of the program. We didn't pick.
Yeah, you're not. I don't know anything about Vic, just to be honest.
That's old school.
Yeah.
No offense, Vic, but we're going way back there. Yeah, that's a great point. Who else did not get picked here that probably should? Lewis Orr didn't get picked.
Louis didn't get picked.
Eton Thomas, A.O., Danny Shays, all great centers. I mean, someone had to get left off the list here.
Jason Hart.
Jimmy Lee didn't get picked. Rudy Hackett. That 75 Final Four team, they deserved their propers, but they didn't quite crack the list here.
Eric Devendorf didn't get picked.
Devo got left off the list. I heard that guy had some attitude problems back then. I couldn't have that on my bench.
Sorry, Devo. Marty Head was another guy.
You could have picked yourself, by the way, Devo. That wasn't against the rules.
Oh no, I had to. I like my squad. I think
your squad's amazing.
I like my squad. Yeah.
Marty Head's another guy. Marty Head was a guy, pure shooter too. One of the first pure shooters out of Christian Brothers Academy in Syracuse.
That's right. All right, so let's recap here before we close up shop. Frankie, Carmelo Anthony, Ronnie Cycli, Billy Owens, Sherman Douglas, Dave Bing, Dion Waiters off the bench. Devo, Derek Coleman, Johnny Flynn, John Wallace, Lawrence Moten, Wes Johnson, Raphael Addison. I had Pearl Washington, Jerry McNamara, Hakeem Warwick, Roosevelt Bowie, Stevie Thompson, Josh Pace. 3 great squads there, guys, and we will put it to the people. We'll put it out to our Syracuse Sports Insiders and on social media to see who, air quotes, won this draft. But a lot of fun. Appreciate you guys hanging with me and doing this and reminiscing a little bit. And I loved some of the surprise picks and where we're going. I think each one of us took a pick from somebody else, and just fun to get together and talk hoops with you guys. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Brent.
Absolutely, Brent. I appreciate you. It was a blast. I hope nobody's too upset because when they put the teams out.
Well, how rational, Devo. You know how rational people on Twitter are.
Right. Oh no, that's crazy. That's a crazy.
I can't wait to see the very calm, reasoned opinions about this.
Who's going to think I'm a dope for picking Ronnie Cycli? I can't wait to see that.
That's 4th overall. Wow. Yeah. I love it though. I love it.